Mike DeLuzio. I can see your timing over there is 8:40 a.m., right? I can see the clock behind you.
Well, I got to change the batteries in that clock. It's a little bit off, but
anyway, it's what time here? It's
I've got
9:15 p.m.
I've got 25 minutes of 9 o'clock in the morning on Friday. What is this? June 17th.
17th.
Yes,
the day remaining the same. It's 9:15 over here in Mumbai, India.
I was on a call last night with Australia, and it was the next day. So,
so nice to have you back after probably a lapse of 5 months, probably. But then I always do weekend with Mark DeLuzio, so I don't miss you at all. So I don't forget to do that. Thanks a lot for putting all the material for me in the Dropbox.
Not a problem.
So thanks a lot. And formalities, I need to introduce you. So here we go.
Okay.
I do this often. So Mark DeLuzio, long time. And I think last time we did was you were with me in episode 4 or 5. And then I moved on and you have moved on in Arizona. The first time that I recorded you were in my episode 1. At that point of time, you were in Atlanta.
Yeah, I was traveling in Atlanta. My son was doing a bunch of TV interviews for his book. And I went with him on that trip. So I was in a hotel room in Atlanta when I did the first one with you. So yes, the last one, I should say, yeah.
After that, you did, I think, 3 more with me. So that is, thank you very much.
Well, we'll do more, We'll do more, Dr. M. That's for sure.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. I mean, you're my mentor, so I'm not going to leave you. So you can't say no.
Well, if I'm your mentor, you're in big trouble. But that's okay. We can talk about that later.
Okay. There we go. You're a candidate for U.S. Congress, Arizona 2nd Congressional District. Why is it called second?
There's 9 in Arizona. We have 9 congressmen. It's based on population. And the district I happen to have is the 2nd Congressional District, which is 62,000 square miles. It's bigger than the state of Pennsylvania, which is 45,000 square miles. And it's one of the biggest in the country. And but I love the district. It includes the Grand Canyon, Navajo Nation, all kinds of different demographics, beautiful topography. Arizona is just an absolutely beautiful state. And it grows on you, you know, the desert actually starts talking to you after a while, you know, and it's just a beautiful place to be.
So there you are. You're, of course, the president and CEO of Lean Horizon. We have seen the emblem. We know a lot about you, but then I have to introduce you, right? So member board of directors and Brand, Danaher Corporation, who can forget you? Danaher DBS. We're going to talk about Danaher, right? And you're the first lean accounting process in US. Danaher's break division. Everybody knows that, but I have to do this formalities. Way back, 87-90, University of, how do you pronounce that? Hartford?
Yeah, University of Hartford. Yes, it's a private university. You know, at that time, that school was more expensive than Yale, and which was kind of crazy, but it was. And then I got my 2 undergraduate degrees in Central Connecticut State University.
This is what I like. You wrote that book, Fat Lined, and I got the autograph book from you, and thank you very much for sending it. Yeah. But what I like about this, Mark, and that's what makes you great. That's what makes you my mentor. You write over here that I'm very proud to have to have been inducted into Shingo Academy, the Hall of Fame of Lean. However, I do not let the stymie my
Yeah,
growth.
stomach. Yeah, stomach my
Stymie
growth.
my
Yep.
growth.
Yep.
After 30 years of practicing lean, I still consider myself a student. I've not arrived, nor will I ever. I still have a lot to learn. What inspired you to write this?
Well, because if you really believe in continuous improvement, and if you really believe in Kaizen, you can't ever think you know it all. Because as you indicated to me, when Amai said, today's standard is I forgot exactly how it was said, but is yesterday's news, right? Because no matter what you do today, you can all, if you don't have the belief that it can be better tomorrow, yeah, we all strive for the one best way, right? And the best way that we know today, but we know it's never perfect. And the only thing that's perfect is our God that we pray to, whatever God that may be. And we are not perfect. And if we ever get to a point where we think we're so perfect and we're so much we've arrived, and I've had a lot of stories about, certifications and companies getting certified, and it's almost as if it was like, hey, look, we don't need to no longer continue to think about improvement because we've mastered it all that there is to master. And I look back at my career, and there's some things that I've done that I look back and I just shake my head and say, how the heck did I do that? At the time, I thought that was the greatest thing in the world since sliced bread. But as I look back now and as I learn more and get exposed to more things and more companies and more cultures and more industries, I see that what I did do in the past maybe was wrong. Not that it was wrong, but it wasn't the most optimal thing like I thought it was back then. So that's why I always consider myself a student. I'm always learning, and if you don't have that mindset, then quite frankly, you're just not wired to do lean. And
Was it was the same reason that in this book you advocated that you should have a healthy dissatisfaction? I think that's the word that you use, healthy dissatisfaction.
Yeah, at Danaher, I came up with that clause or that saying at Danaher when we were developing the Danaher business system, and it almost got to a point where sometimes it was just never good enough. Like, okay, well, and I saw executives going into Kaizen events on a Friday afternoon for the report out, and they would sit there and they would say, hey, look, why didn't you guys do this? And why didn't the team think about this? Well, guess what? Those doors never would have been open if that team didn't work, 70 hours that week on the Kaizen. So when I hear that from an executive, I say, well, where were you last Friday? Why didn't you think of this last Friday? Okay. You can't say that to this team. Okay. And the fact that you're sitting here, now that they've opened up the doors through Kaizen to the next level of opportunity, you're here in the United States, we call that Monday morning quarterback, right?
Yeah.
Where you're Monday morning, you're judging the football game from Sunday and what you would have done if you were the coach, right? That's what we call Monday morning quarterback. And I say, look, get on the Kaizen team and show us your brilliance, okay, Mr. Executive, right? And so it got to be that I really put a stop to that because, and so I came up with this saying that we have to have a healthy dissatisfaction with the status quo. In other words, we're going to celebrate, right? All the great accomplishments that we did. Oh, there's Phantom. I love that dog. So we're going to celebrate all the great accomplishments that we had. However, when it comes to, we'll take the weekend off and we'll go, we didn't take weekends off, but Monday morning we come back in and now we're a little bit more angry that we're hungry for the next level of improvement. So we want to have a healthy dissatisfaction, not a negative dissatisfaction that nothing's perfect. We know nothing's perfect, but we can't continue to bask in a sea of negativity. We have to actually look at problems as positive opportunities to take the next step to get better. And that was the whole notion of that saying.
Actually, when I interacted with Rico Keno, she also told me about Monday quarterbacks. And she, I think, quoted you by saying Monday quarterbacks, that you don't participate in it, but you you talk about everything in the negative manner or being critical about it.
Well, there's two types of people: people that sit in the stands and judge the people in the arena, or people that get in the arena to try to make change. All right. And if you're in the stands judging everybody, and that's one of the problems with lean today, is that you've got a lot of executives, especially in the financial circles, the CFOs of the world, who sit there with their scorecard, judging everything, not understanding that they have to be part and parcel to the transformation. Otherwise it won't work. So you can't sit there with a scorecard and then judge everybody plus and minus. You have to get into the arena and fight with the lions like everybody else is. Otherwise it's not going to work, especially the financial community. So they don't understand that. A lot of times I try to tell them that, when you're sitting in the arena, in the stands, and then judging, it's just not going to work. It's not going to work. And so, there's no time for that. Those bystanders, and lean's not a spectator sport, right? So either get in the arena or get out. By the way, I try to tell my wife I'm perfect, but she somehow finds Kaizen opportunities for me. And by the way, we'll be married 42 years this month. So
yeah, I'm 1 year younger to you there. Mine's going to be 40. Oh, mine's going to be 41.
You better know that number. You can't be thinking about it. You got to know that. That's one number you can't forget. Even more than your name, you can't forget that number. Okay, you'll get in trouble.
Yeah, Mark, here I have a photograph of yours. Where are you now?
Well, this is me and Nakao-san in Connecticut. So I got a call from a senior executive at Danaher, an ex-senior executive, John Cosentino, and he had not known I moved from Connecticut to Arizona. And I haven't talked to John in a little over a year or so. And he said, Nakao is in town. He's going to this restaurant called Max Fish, which was my favorite restaurant. And he wants to see you for dinner. Can you meet him on Thursday night next week? I said, well, John, geez, I live in Arizona now. And he didn't know. Matter of fact, this restaurant was in the town I lived in. So I said, I haven't seen Nakao in quite a few years, right? And I said, John, I'll be there. Tell Nakao I'll be there. So I flew specifically right from Arizona to Connecticut just to have dinner with Nakao. Okay, that's how special he is to me. And I brought him some. You have to bring him a gift. You don't have to, but it's nice to bring him a gift. So he likes tea. I brought him prickly pear tea from Arizona. Prickly pear is a cactus. Okay, and he liked that. I gave him a canister of tea. But when we sat at this dinner that night, there was 20 people there, and 90% of the conversation was Nakao and I just talking about old times. And again, just to let you know who Nakao was, he was the president of Shingijutsu. Iwata was the founder and CEO, and Nakao was his right-hand person, or his number two guy of Shingijutsu at the time. So it was Nakao and Iwata. Nakao, way back in the 90s, Nakao and I were having dinner at a Japanese restaurant called Mirasaki in Simsbury, Connecticut. And I said to Nakao-san, could you please tell me what Ono was like? And he didn't answer. And I looked at Nakao and he had tears coming down his eyes.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. And he got up from the table and he left.
Mm.
I turned to the consultant next to me, which was a guy named Shimbo, who unfortunately passed away. And Shimbo said to me, nobody ever asked him such a direct question about Ono-san.
Mm.
And he's very emotional about Ono. So Nakao came back, and about 5 minutes later, and nobody said anything at the table. And I shut my big mouth, right? So he said, DeLuzio-san, would you like to know about Ono-san? And I said, well, if you don't mind. Well, he went on for almost an hour with Ono stories and told me all about Ono. Okay. I wish I had recorded it. And at the end of that, he looked at me and said, DeLuzio-san, you are a disciple of Ono through me.
Mm.
You must carry on Ono's word.
Mm.
You must promise me you will do that, right? And that's why I'm on LinkedIn doing the things I do, because I really took that oath with Nakao to make sure that the purity of the Toyota production system was pure. And I'm sure Reiko Kano talked to you about that too.
Yeah.
There's so many deviations and everybody trying to put their 2 cents on changing it and making a name for themselves, instead of just going ahead and learning what Ono's taught us and what Nakao and Iwata taught us, and mastering that first as best we can before we think we can be smart enough to change everything. If you don't understand the essence of this, and lean seems to be very simple, but there's a lot of nuances to it that are counter to the way most people think. And this is what I gathered from Iwata, Nakao, and others of how they think by being with them so many times, right? I probably spent more time with Nakao than most people ever have. And it rubs off on you after a while. People talk about kata, right? Well, when kata came out, I kind of chuckled because it's like, why is this a separate thing? It was ingrained in our thinking through the people like Nakao. It was ingrained in our thinking. It's not a separate thing that you go like another tool that you pull out of the toolbox. It's a nice consulting gig for people because they go teach this stuff. But all these tools, Dr. M, are Venn diagrams that work together. You can't build a house with just a hammer, right? But everybody thinks that you could just do kata and that's lean, or you could just do 5S and that's lean, or whatever. Pick the tool of the day, and it's not. And so the kata mentality was ingrained in us just by kind of doing, what we were doing. And so now all of a sudden we have this as a new entity out there, and it's a nice consulting gig and people are making a lot of money on it. But I think it's a disservice, quite frankly, in my opinion, to the lean community, because it's not, it kind of distracts you towards what this really is all about in some sense, right? So at that dinner, Nakao said to me, DeLuzio-san, he remembered that dinner back in the 90s. That was 30 years earlier. And he said to me, DeLuzio-san, I remember I challenged you to practice Ono's, to continue Ono's words. And he said, you are the only one from Danaher that did that. That's not entirely true, by the way, but I wasn't going to argue with him, okay? But he said, you're the only one from Danaher who did what I told them to do, and because it's not really true. I mean, Art Byrne, George Koenigsegger, some others, that did. But I committed my life to actually, making sure when I see somebody who's off track on lean in accordance with what I was taught with Nakao Iwata. And I never had a chance to meet Ono. He basically died right around the same time I went to Japan in 1990. It was my first trip to Japan to meet with Iwata, to go there with Iwata and Nakao and Shingijutsu. He had died around that time in 1990. So I never got to meet the man, and I wish I had, but I feel like I know him through the stories that people like Nakao have told me, So he's a fabulous guy. He is, to me, the world's best at what we do. He really is the world's best at what we do. And as much as I've learned, and as much as I've known over the years and accomplished, compared to him, I'm barely out of kindergarten. Okay, that's how good he is. And
you wrote a poem on him.
Well, I did. Yeah, I've got it right here. If you want me to read it, I could read it.
Why not? I'll do one thing. Let's hear your voice now, right? So,
Okay.
Yeah, let's hear you.
Okay, so Nakao has a way to really, point out your issues, right? But he does it respectfully in some sense, but he also does it so that he'll never tell you the answer, right? He'll never tell you, and that's a Socratic method that we all learned from people like Nakao and Iwata and what have you. And I'll bet you any money, Reiko Kano talked about that. So this is the ode to my sensei, Chichiro Nakao, okay? It was one of the 2 or 3 people that influenced me, more than anything in my life. Let's see. He came from Japan, an unusual cat, could not understand our mess. He didn't think that we would succeed. We'd buckle under the stress. And by the way, just to kind of break off from this for a minute, we were the first ones to bring him over to the United States at Danaher, at Jake Break, the division I was at. So Art Byrne, George Koenigsegger, Art Byrne, and me, and Bob Pentland, who was instrumental in this, and who was our VP of operations at the time. I was CFO. And so the very first Kaizens that happened was there at Jake Break in Bloomfield, Connecticut, which just got bought out by Cummins Engine, by the way. But anyway, so we brought him over, and this is when they came to see our plant. It was like, are you guys kidding me? You guys are crazy. So let me continue. His name was Nakao, an engineer. Said he worked for a guy named Ono. Claimed he learned spectacular things. He sounded like a virtuoso. Our operations, he said, was so bad. He couldn't believe his eyes. As he walked through the plant, he shook his head. I thought, is this our demise? I started to give a pathetic excuse. He gazed at me as if to say, you're in transmit mode. You need to shut up. Please stop your verbal ballet. He asked for my wallet. Is this guy nuts? He left it on top of my stash. I asked for it back, and he firmly exclaimed, treat inventory like it's your cash. These are all true stories. My maintenance room, he was aghast. Disbelief, he started to utter. A doctor to operate on your young son, would you accept all this clutter? By the way, he thought the maintenance room was the heart and soul of the plant in terms of, he viewed it as an operating room. He said to us, you should be able to eat off the floor in the maintenance room. Okay, the maintenance room is like, a
Can you
key.
repeat that again? Because your audio was a little low. Can you repeat that again? Eat off the floor, you said, right?
He said that the maintenance room is like an operating room to a hospital.
Mm.
And you should be able to eat off the floor in your maintenance room. The quality guy, he gave a report. Nakao tore his report in half. If you can't remember your lunch from last week, what good are all of these stats? An engineer said his machine was old and needed a new replacement. He told Nakao it was 15 years. His response was quite an amazement. Nakao then asked for the engineer's age. He said he was 29. If a machine that old was younger than he, a new engineer we will need to find. This is Nakao, classic Nakao. I told him one day that I knew standard work. He challenged and thought I was crazy. He looked at my cell and started to laugh. DeLuzio son, you have been lazy. He fired us often when we let him down. It was a sign of respect. He hired us back at the end of the day, recognizing we were inept. Nakao knocked us down when we thought we were good. Very demanding. he kept us humble. Despite all the press over DBS, our kaizens, we sometimes fumbled. On a lighter note, he joked around. He warned me, said I'd be sad. Don't do kaizen at home, he once said. Wife will get very mad. Concrete heads, he'd shout when we disagreed. Beavis and Butthead was really hot. He told me in private at dinner one night, concrete can change, buttheads cannot. Dinner with him was always a treat. Took a quick look at the roster. Our waiter's face was priceless at best when he asked for a female lobster. And by the way, if you let me, am I able to share my screen?
What happened? You want to share your screen?
I'm going to share my screen right now.
I'll stop mine, then you can share yours.
No, it's okay. I got it right here. I want to show you. Can you see this? So we're in Arkansas, and we're at a fish, like a seafood restaurant. And this is where he asked the waiter, who was like a college kid. Can you see the screen, by the way?
Yeah, I can see the screen.
Okay.
Your audio
So
is low.
So he said to the waiter, he said, I want a lobster, but a female lobster. And the college waiter, he was a college kid, and he looked at him, he goes, what? A female lobster? How could you tell? So I took out a piece of paper, and this is what he drew. This is Nakao's handwriting. The one on the left is a male lobster, and the one on the right is a female. And he wanted all the larvae and the eggs and whatever goes in a female lobster. That's what he wanted. And so the look on the kid's face was priceless. It was like, nobody ever asked me for a female lobster before. But I keep this as, I got the original. I keep this as as just a momentum of the funny things that we did together, So let me continue here. Where am I? Yeah, again, that whole thing was, dinner with him was always a treat. Took a quick look at the roster. Our waiter's face was priceless at best when he asked for a female lobster. Okay, so a kind man, he was hospitable too. He once took us out to eat blowfish, prepared several ways. He said it was safe. Not really sure how he'd know this. Blowfish is poison. A sushi bar was a gemba to him, his teachings beyond reproach. The sushi chef was one-piece flow, never missed a chance to coach. He would take us to the sushi bar and have us watch how the sushi chef would prepare the food. And he'd talk about how the one-piece flow, he's always teaching, always taking the opportunity to teach. He came to my house for dinner one night. Loved golf. He taught my son. A consummate teacher he couldn't resist. As sensei, his job's never done. He could not believe that I moved my desk, a CFO, on the factory floor. Did not know what to make of my move. In his eyes, hope came once more. Money man, he called me. He wanted to know. Thought I was just being cutesy. Kaizen is not why I go to Japan. I just like to eat their great sushi. He anointed me as Ono's disciple. His doctrines, he made me commit to teach Ono's word to my dying days. He felt that I was equipped. To call him a mentor is a slap in the face. To me, he was so much more. A friend, a teacher, a father to me. His impact I couldn't ignore. My years would be different, save not for Nakao, responsible for changing my life. I'll never view lobster the way I once did,
Mm.
but finally did Kaizen at the request of my wife. Now, often we meet someone so rare, God's work, his creation, a mystery. When the books have been written and stories are told, Nakao will go down in history.
Wow.
So,
Thanks a lot, Mark, for reading it out.
yeah. He's really a special guy. You know, I just learned he's turning 80, and there's a group of us that want to go to Japan to just be with him for, not to do Kaizen or not to, just to go with him, have dinner, just hang out, maybe golf, whatever. And I was just talking to a couple of people who, he means as much as he does to me. And so I want to but COVID really messed the whole thing up with traveling and everything else. But he's something else, and then Iwata, I'm sure Reiko, talked about Iwata. He was special as well, and they were different. They were different in terms of how they philosophically, obviously they're on the same page, both mentored by Ono. And just to let people know how this all came to be, Ono-san, when he started the whole Toyota production system, picked 10 engineers. And he picked them from their suppliers and also from different parts of Toyota, and brought them into what he called the autonomous study group.
Mm.
And I believe your mentor, Dr. M, was one of those 10. Okay.
Mm.
And so it was Iwata, it was Nakao. The originals that we worked with were Nino, Niwa, and Takanaka. Those were the 5 original Shingijutsu guys that we brought over from Japan. And then they added more consultants over the course of time in that whole company. But anyway, I've done several study missions with them, mostly with Nakao in Japan. I did probably 6 or 7, bringing 30 Danaher executives at a time over to do Kaizen and also do benchmarking tours. And so the original 6 or 5 that we brought over in 1987, which just happens to be when I started working at Danaher and at Jake Break, I was just in the right spot at the right time. And I moved from finance into operations after my first trip to Japan. Our new CEO, George Sherman, said, "What do you want to do for your career?" I said, "Well, look, I'm 33 years old. I'm CFO of this division, but I want to move into operations." And before I knew it, I was running operations, and I found out how much I didn't know about the operations. You think you know everything until you go have to do it, which is a totally different game. So which was a great learning experience for me. And then I got the chance to actually supply Hino Motors. So Hino Motors is part of Toyota, the big truck manufacturer and diesel engine manufacturer for Toyota. So I got to get to know them. I spent a lot of time at Hino studying there, but between their engineers and Nakao, we did the first 3P line in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an absolutely phenomenal cell that we created. My Hino cell was amazing. And it not only outperformed everything within Jake Break, but it outperformed everything within Danaher. It was almost impossible to make a defect, right? It had so much poka-yoke, and we had Hanadashi devices on Chaku type lines. We had Judoka, we had all that built in. But it was through the genius of Nakao and the Hino engineers that worked together to create this line, okay? And that was a heck of a learning experience just to be part of that, But Iwata was ill. Reiko might have told you more about this, because Reiko kind of was Iwata's right-hand person, through the years, and his interpreter as well. And so I got a phone call once, and I was still at Danaher. I got a phone call from Reiko, actually. This is when I was living in Connecticut. And Iwata actually wanted to meet me for dinner. Now, he was working at Pratt & Whitney, which is part of United Technologies at the time, in Connecticut. He wasn't working for us this time at Danaher, but he wanted to see me. And I thought it a little bit odd, but okay, I mean, why wouldn't the guys at United Technologies want to go out with him and spend as much time with him as possible, right? I mean, when I was with them, I didn't want to have a minute go by where I wasn't with them because the learning was just amazing, Anyway, I met Iwata for dinner, and ironically, Reiko wasn't there with him. He just showed up by himself. And he spoke English, not, it wasn't his number one language, of course, but he did get by with some English, And we had dinner at, of course, a sushi restaurant. And we got talking, and, he said to me, well, I said to him, I said, Iwata-san, you've been ill. How are you doing? DeLuzio-san, fine, everything good. Everything's good, he says, no problem. Everything's good. Oh, that's good to hear, Well, 2 months later, he died. 2 months later, he died. And I talked to Iwata's daughter, Kumi Iwata, whose name now, her married name is Kumi Otaki. And she runs another version of Shingijutsu up in the state of Washington. And she's a wonderful person, because Iwata had invited us to his guest house in Japan. She did a beautiful tea ceremony for us, which is still remembered to this day. And they treated us like gold over there. And we got to stay at their guest house, which was like breathtaking in terms of on the coast of the Sea of Japan. And they took us golfing. They took us to Mikimoto's Pearl Factory, where, that was pretty incredible. And so Kumi said to me, well, that was my father's way of saying goodbye to you. He knew he was going to die. And I thought it was odd that Reiko wasn't with him when he came, and so, but it was like just 2 months later that he passed away, so, and he was a special guy too. He was a special guy. A lot of lessons from him. He couldn't understand how, and I posted about this on LinkedIn. Iwata couldn't understand how we thought 3.4 parts per million defects was a good thing. Why is Six Sigma such a good thing? He couldn't understand, philosophically, he could not understand why we thought that was a good benchmark. If it wasn't zero in our mind, and I've gotten into so many arguments with engineers over the years that tell me how it's impossible to get zero defects. And they missed the point. Whether it's possible technically or not is not the point. The point is it's a mindset, okay? And he couldn't understand why we were planning to fail. See, that's a different mindset than we have here, right? People here say, "Oh, we're gonna actually demoralize everybody by putting a goal out there that's not possible to get," and they miss the point. And totally, this is where leadership has to intervene and learn the real, true essence of lean, or TPS, if you will, because when you take that kind of approach and attitude, and by the way, the argument I've had on this over LinkedIn, some pretty notable lean people out there who put themselves up there as being, really foremost in the space, and they argue about how, from a technical perspective, how zero defects are not possible, right? And they missed the point that this is about mindset. I remember Nakao, I think it was Iwata or Nakao, I can't remember now, telling me, why are you planning on 98% on-time delivery as a goal? Why don't you call the customers now that you're going to disappoint and let them know in advance that you're not going to ship to them? Which 2% of your customers are you going to disappoint, right? They could not understand why we'd planned to fail. And that's just a different mindset. and this is what I'm talking about with these guys, that they brought that mindset to us that was just so counterintuitive. When the car would come up and say, why are you trying to optimize your equipment? Why are you trying to make as many parts on that equipment as possible? Well, this is what led me to think about lean accounting and all the things. I started my career in cost accounting, and I was a pretty damn good cost accountant, okay? And I started looking at all the dysfunctional behaviors, Dr. M, that the traditional accounting measures, if you will, promoted. Well, they promoted the building of unnecessary industry through absorption accounting. They promoted
when are you coming across to on my episode to talk about the lean accounting?
Yeah, no, we'll get more into that then, but purchase price variance. Oh, geez, what's the easiest way to get a lower price and a better purchase price variance? Buy a lot of stuff, buy in quantity when you don't need it. Okay. Buy 50,000 units when you only need 5,000. Well, I got a good deal on it, so couldn't resist, right? You wouldn't do that in your daily life, right? So that's what led to the whole lean accounting thing through the teachings of, Nakao and Iwata and others, in terms of, when they would go down and tell you, slow that machine down. That is so counterintuitive. I want you to do more changeovers. We try to avoid changeovers through the traditional EOQ metric that, the economic order quantity through the MRP Ali White school of thought. And we try to minimize changeovers. Their attitude is, no, you've got to do more changeovers and get really good at them, right? And I'll give you one little story. One of the trips that we went to with, I think it was Nakao. Yeah, it was Nakao. And we went to a plant that Ono used to be part of. And what this plant did was they had injection molding, and they made all the parts that went into like the dashboard, the vents and the knobs, and they would assemble the dashboard as a kit and then bring it to Toyota, right? To put it into the cars. Well, the injection molding machines, I'm walking through the plant with the president, and I have 30 people behind me. As a matter of fact, I think on this particular trip, Larry Culp, now who is the CEO of Japan, was with me on that trip. And we're walking through with 30 Danaher executives. I'm leading the way with the president, and I'm talking to the president, and I saw the injection molding machines, and I said to him, I said, how long does it take to change over your injection molding machines? And he responded by saying 1 minute. I go, 1 minute? Wow. Like the best I've ever seen was 15 with Nippon Denso. Matter of fact, Japanese, in Tennessee, there's a plant, they did 15 minutes. Anyway, well, that's incredible. I said, when are you going to do your next changeover? He says, not until 2:00 this afternoon. I go, okay. But DeLuzio-san, would you like to see a changeover? I go, are you kidding me? I said, you would actually do a changeover now when you don't need to? Yes, we'll do it. He called us 2 guys. He had 2 guys who are dedicated to changeover. By the way, we talk about this on LinkedIn. And you can't dedicate people to changeover. It's a waste of resources, right? Yeah, okay. Tell that to the NASCAR driver or the Indy or the Formula One racer. Tell them that it's a waste to have a dedicated pit crew, right? To change the tires out. So anyway, big arguments about that, right? And dedicated changeover team, they already had preheated molds. They had manifolds where you didn't have to do any kind of, hose adjustments or all that. Anyway, they did it in 55 seconds. They changed over in 55 seconds. We all gave them an applause, and they bowed when they did it. Then what did they do? They changed it back to the one they had to run. It's that simple for them, right? It's that simple for them. And then the president looked at me and said, DeLuzio-san, thank you for giving us the opportunity to practice our changeover. Okay. That mentality we don't get here for the most part. CEOs don't get this. Okay. They think they do, but they don't. And they don't know, really the total different counterintuitive thinking that goes into real Toyota production system or lean, And so these are the stories that I can tell you that are just totally, just counterintuitive, and so the whole notion of avoiding changeovers turns to, now I want to learn how to do more, because the more I could do changeover, the closer I can match my production schedule to my demand schedule. People don't buy 5,000 white Camrys at a time. That's not how they sell Camrys. So why am I going to make 5,000 white Camrys?
Mm.
You go to the Toyota production line and you'll see a Camry and an Avalon and a Corolla right behind each other on the same line. Okay. Now, a lot of that has to do with how they design, and the design really does understand manufacturing and vice versa. So a lot of that is influenced by how the product's designed. But also, though, the whole thing is genius, and you'll never see that. A lot of the companies you go to, you'll see, you'll see 100 white Tauruses coming down the line, or 100 white Ford Broncos coming down the line, and then you'll see blue ones, and you'll see the same, and that's how most traditional manufacturers make cars. Not at Toyota, okay, not at Toyota, and it's absolute genius what they do there. And I seem to remember my first trip over there, where they I asked them, how is it that you guys can actually allow your competition to come into your factories here in Japan? I was in Toyota City, and a senior executive of Toyota said to me, what they need to know, they cannot see. Okay. Yeah, I can show you my production line. I could show you my kanbans and my visual and-on lights, but when that light goes red, any idiot can put a red light up, okay, and any idiot can turn it on. What's the thought process and the sense of urgency and the culture that responds to that red light, that and-on light, So that's the thing that people don't get, all right? So like I said, you could put a red light up. Who doesn't know how to do that? But what goes behind it? And that's the invisible that you can't see with a plant tour. So anyway, I'll stop there. But these guys, just the way they thought, they really had a disdain. I said this in my poem. They had a disdain for, they had a disdain for people thinking old machines are bad, right? And so many engineers today love to buy the latest toys with all the bells and whistles, right? And if you go back to 3P mentality and philosophy, you look at that and you say, single PT, Nakao used to say, PT boats, not battleships. We don't want battleships. We want PT boats, small, flexible, maneuverable equipment with one operation per piece of equipment. Okay. And then you can stay under takt time. If you load everything up into one machine, you'll increase your cycle time on that piece of equipment, which will violate your takt time. And all of a sudden now you got to go to second shift, and that was another thing they couldn't understand. How could you staff a second shift without maintenance, without engineers? They all go home at 5 o'clock. How could you would you run a hospital without nurses at night, and without doctors on call? No, you wouldn't. And they could not ever understand why in America, we would run a second shift with skeleton crews. They could not understand it. And again, it's just the way they thought. We look at it from a cost perspective. Well, we can't afford, or we can't get an engineer to work on second shift. We can't get a maintenance guy to work on, on second shift. And it was always a skeleton crew. And that's, normally your second shift was so least productive compared to the first shift because you didn't have the support mechanisms there, So it's all these different things that they did. But when it comes to equipment, and that's a true story, by the way. When the cow said, hey, how old are you? I'm 29. The engineer said, it looks like we need a new machine too. A new engineer too, he said, he says, the machine's 15 years old and we need a new machine. And that was the reason why the engineer needed a new machine. Okay. So all these things with these guys are just, it's just a fabulous experience to be able to work with them and to just, get ingrained into their thought process, Nakao was also an artist too, and he drew this for us in the early days of Danaher. He kind of drew the Danaher production system, because in the early days, by the way, you might know, this, I think, but some people out there might not know. It was not the Danaher business system at first; it was the Danaher production system.
Yeah.
Because we were modeling it after the Jacobs production system, which was modeled after the Toyota production system. So at the time it was DPS, and this is Nakao. I don't know if you can see this or not.
Yeah, bring it. There you are. That's but much better.
Okay.
That's great.
Now this is what Nakao did for me, and he drew the house, and you can see Jidoka and JIT as the pillars. That's TPS, right?
Yeah.
And the tornado up above that he drew, the hurricane, was the amount of consternation you're going to have to go through to really transform your company, right?
Wow.
Okay, and so this is, and Nakao was a great artist, he really was, and this is what he did for us, and so this is in the early days where we brought him over. I don't know the date on this, if he has a date on it or not, but it was early, and so I framed this and I keep it in my office as a momentum to Nakao, and
Lovely.
what he learned. Yeah. So
thanks a lot, Mark. That was a lovely piece.
Yeah, I could sit here all day and talk to you about these guys, but they meant a lot, and Nakao means a lot. I hope I get to go over to Japan to see him one more time, and go from there. But he's quite a guy. He's quite a guy. And by the way, he's a phenomenal engineer. I mean, he could look at a tool, and he designed tools. He designed. I mean, he is just phenomenal in terms of his ability to design equipment and to design tooling and all that. He's just a master, and the whole notion, the whole notion of 3P, which means the production preparation process. He's known as the father of moonshine, and moonshine, where he got that name, moonshine, he said to us, was when in the old days back in the South, where they would make moonshine illegally. Moonshine, of course, if it's not known in India, it's an alcohol, very potent alcohol, grain alcohol. And you would take a garbage can and a garden hose and whatever you had around to make a still to make moonshine. Okay. You'd use whatever was available. All right. Pots and pans, whatever. Right. And so the whole idea of 3P is to take anything like, cardboard and plywood and pipe and just create a mock idea of a piece of equipment. And it's also tied into this. It's more complicated than that. It's not just the equipment, it's the design of the product as well. But the whole notion of 3P is that you use natural forces to do things, like gravity, for example, right? And they would go back to nature and they would look at what's natural. Whenever you try to do something with a piece of equipment that's just not natural, is where you run into problems, is their philosophy, right? So like a Hanadashi device, you spit out the part, which means unload. You use gravity. Gravity is natural. We have that here all, it's a natural phenomenon, right? So they use that. Water flows. So flowing is another concept, and the way a snake moves, the nice slithering, smooth movement, anything that's rough and has to fight itself is not going to work with a piece of equipment. So all that philosophy goes into the thinking of a moonshining 3P type of approach. And Nakao was the guy that invented it. And I remember twice I went to a plant in Japan he took me to called Magama Denki. It's up in the northern part of Japan near Sapporo. And they make speaker cones for Bose and Pioneer and all that. This plant was probably the most phenomenal plant I've ever been to in my life, but more so than Toyota. And And he had Chaco lines set up where you just looked at what you see Nakao's touch that plant. He was so proud of that plant. And he took me there twice, and I took, executives there to see it. And that plant was just absolutely amazing. And everybody wants to automate everything, right? Which, what we learned from Nakao, there's 4 parts of automation. You've got the process itself. Let's say you're drilling a hole with a drill. You're drilling a hole. That's the process. That's one step. You got the load and the unload. Those 2 more steps. And then you got the transfer. How do you take this part and move it to the next piece of equipment? Well, Nakao says the Chaco line is, which means load.
Yeah.
So all the operator's doing is loading. That's it. Walking, loading, right? The 2 parts you don't want to automate are the load, because the load has to be very precise into the fixture or whatever. So you can't, automating that, you'll come into all kinds of problems. And then of course you don't want to automate the transfer, because the transfer is where the mechanism of transferring is also very problematic. It's wasteful, and it's usually when equipment goes down and everything's tied together with this transfer mechanism, well, the whole line shuts down then. Okay, so if you have 12 machines tied together with automated transfer mechanisms, and the transfer mechanism breaks, everything's dead, right? The whole process is done. So you think about the fact that the unload with the Hanadashi is the push the part out and just use gravity, right? So what you don't automate is the transfer mechanism and the loading. That's all done manually, right? Provided the part's not 5,000 pounds, of course, right? But there's still ways to do it with a heavy part. But anyway, that was his whole philosophy. So you wanted to get the optimal automation, or with Jidoka and Poka-yoke and all that into the process, and target that. This fully automated stuff that people go for is problematic, and you usually run into all kinds of issues that way, thinking that you're going to be able to be smart enough to figure it all out, but you inevitably run into all these issues. I remember spending a full day at Hino Motors in their connecting rod cell, and I was there with my engineers, and we were in this cell looking at every single process. And they were machining this connecting rod right out of a casting. And we couldn't take pictures, but the engineer said, "I'll do a drawing for you if you're interested." So we pointed out 2 things that day. We didn't want to be, inconsiderate. At the next day, he showed up in the morning. He stayed all night. He drew out all of the things that we were interested in. He had a stack of things like this, and he handed it to me. He handed it to me and said, "DeLuzio-san," because we were developing the Hino line at Jake Break. He says, "We want your line to be like our line." And he handed me these documents. And we incorporated all those Poka-yokes and Jidokas into our line, right? And I asked the engineer that day, foolishly, I said, "Where do you put your defects?" And he said to me, "DeLuzio-san, we do not make defects in this cell." Okay. I felt like an idiot, right? Asking that question, right? We don't make defects here. Okay. And I really do believe that if you went and tried to make a defect, Dr. M, you wouldn't be able to do it. You wouldn't be able to do it. Okay. They had so much foolproof, Poka-yoke and all that in that thing. But the whole moonshine approach with Nakao, he was the father of moonshine. And people still don't get what that's all about. They still don't understand. They want to go out and buy these big lights out multi processes. I had a client one time. We had this cell set up, single operations. I set up, 1-piece flow and all this, and the takt time. I'm going to make the numbers up because I don't remember what they were, but the takt time was like 2 minutes, and every one of those processes was under 2 minutes. So I go back there about 6 months later, And the engineers and the VP of operation, Mark, you got to come out and see our new machine we bought. I said, oh, wait, well, what's this going to be about, right? I go out there, they got this big battleship piece of equipment that's machining all of these parts, okay? We do it now all in one machine. As a matter of fact, the total cycle time of that cell was, again, I'm going to make it up, was 18 minutes, and now we can do it in this machine in 12. Wow. I said, well, has your volume changed? No. Okay, so how's your second shift doing? And your third shift? How'd you know we had to put on a second and third shift? Because your tap time's 2 minutes. Okay. And you're not even, and you're working weekends too, aren't you? Because with 12 minutes, you can't even make it enough on third shift if everything goes right. You put all your operations to one piece of equipment, you violated the 3P philosophy, and now you just added all this cost, all this complexity, all this, inequality and all that, because you didn't think about Nakao and the philosophy of 3P. You had this perfect cell that was, working within the context. Your drop-off rate was within every 2 minutes. You had and we set the standard work sequences up every 2 minutes. Yeah, but we don't use any more labor. Yeah, okay, well, good luck at that. What about your supervisors? What about this? What about that? What about that? And all they focused on was reducing labor. And they weren't thinking about the whole picture of this, right? And so it was what I call an engineer's wet dream, quite frankly, okay? The engineers got so enamored with the technology, and they had all these bells and whistles and lights and all this cool stuff that was going on, and they forgot the basics. They forgot the basics, and so going back to basics, one of the basics here with equipment design is you want PT boats, you don't want battleships. And they went out and bought themselves a battleship, which was also very difficult to change over. Okay. It's another problem for another day. But anyway, I can go on and on, but these are kind of things, Dr. M, that, when you start working with them and start learning, and I'm afraid there's so much I don't know, because I know I don't, but what I was able to learn so far in my lifetime with them is I value, not because I'm brilliant, it's because they were brilliant and they had the ability to teach, So anyway.
Thanks a lot. Hey.